Hello and welcome to Based on Facts, where fiction and superstition meet logic and scientific facts on WELT 95.7 FM, broadcasting from the Allen County Public Library. My name is Chris Rex, and today we'll be discussing St. Patrick's Day because that's what day I'm recording on. So, I basically was awakened this morning to my wife trying to get me to go out to Wrigley Field Bar and Grill. They had a free breakfast buffet going on, and she managed to convince me to get out of bed and join her, since she works just next door, a few doors down at one of the businesses there in the strip mall. Anyway, I was able to gather myself because I've been kind of stressed the past few days, having just started a new class. And so I really didn't want to get out of bed, but you know what? My wife managed to convince me. And so I gathered up my spirits and we headed over there to Wrigley Field Bar. And we were able to enjoy a number of different breakfast buffet items, such as French toast sticks, biscuits and gravy, bacon, sausage, scrambled eggs, things of that nature. So very standard breakfast buffet, but it was very nice. It's always nice to get something for free, so to speak. Now, of course, being St. Patrick's Day, we had to imbibe in a little bit of beer, even though it was about 8:30 by the time we got there. But being St. Patrick's Day, you have green beer, so you have to imbibe in something, right? So we had a green beer too, and she proceeded to go on to work because, like I said, she's just down the way. Me, on the other hand, I was able to stay and observe some of the further happenings at Wrigley Field, one of which happened at about 9:30 a.m., and that was the midget jello wrestling. I'd never seen a midget do anything on stage before, so it was interesting for me just from the perspective of looking at what human looks and behaves if they are predisposed towards dwarfism, which is essentially what a midget is. Now, this whole event of midget jello wrestling, this was all mediated by 98.9 The Bear, another radio station here in town. And John the Mexican was actually the one who was mediating this whole event. He was moderating the wrestling event. And so he goes up there on stage and takes the mic and introduces the midget, whose name is Pinky Shortcake, if I remember correctly. And Pinky Shortcake professes that she can actually physically lift with her arms a weight of 200 pounds. And looking at her, I don't doubt her. She is a fairly intimidating woman for being someone of that size. And she, I don't know, it's kind of amazing because she had this very presence in the room. Even though she was so little, she had a very large presence in the room. And part of that was because of, I think, the amount of confidence that she had in her abilities and in her strength and her ability to perform if put in an actual wrestling situation. So, needless to say, I was not going to try to go up there and wrestle against her, because if I actually started trying, she would start trying. And because she can lift 200 pounds, which is clearly more than I can lift, and actually that's more than I weigh, that kind of turned me off to that. So I was just going to lean back and observe the whole instance happening here. And what I observed was 3 different dudes, 2 of them large, 1 of them small, going up there and actually wrestling with her in the gelatin-filled inflatable pool that they had up there on stage. Now that was kind of neat to watch, just from the perspective of, oh, well, it's green gelatin. It is a substance which is somewhat malleable, so It kind of splats, but it kind of hurts at the same time. It's an interesting buffer substance, as chemists would call it. But when it comes to wrestling, it's really just kind of fun. Not only to watch, but to participate in, I'm sure. And so I just sat back with my camera, recorded the thing, and it was a lot of entertainment. But there was actually one woman that also participated in this contest. And that was nice just because of the fact that women get to don a bikini in order to participate in this particular contest. So you have a midget in a bikini versus a normal sized girl in a bikini. And that's when the crowd starts going wild. Just because for some reason males of the human species tend to enjoy certain female-female encounters, whether it be hostile, such as in the case of wrestling, or otherwise. So in this actual case, we had the female almost performing the best out of any of the other candidates in wrestling against this midget. Now this midget is kind of a professional wrestler. She, like I said, is very, very strong. She is used to this kind of behavior. But honestly, for Wrigley Field Bar and Grill, she kind of downplayed her own attributes, just for the purposes of trying not to hurt the volunteers that were coming from the crowd. And volunteers were coming from the crowd because there was $100 on the line. $100 bill, crisp. John the Mexican was holding it from 98.9 The Bear. He was the one who brought everybody back up on stage and decided to try and figure out who actually won, according to the audience's opinion of their performance during the fights or during the wrestling matches in the Jello. Now, as we would expect, the woman was the one who actually won, probably because she was the hot one, because the audience was predominantly male. She was the attractive one. She was the one who actually put forth a lot of effort. Now, that's not to say that one of the other guys didn't put forth a lot of effort, but she definitely put forth enough effort to warrant the prize, because she definitely gave Bridget her 2 cents, so to speak, or not Bridget, Pinky Shortcake, her 2 cents, and was able to pin the midget at one point. But basically what we had was a situation where we had this midget JLo wrestling. We ended up having the one woman that participated winning the event, winning the $100 cash, and then we proceeded to the next activity, which happened to be looking at some other stuff. So we're not going to cover that. But what we are going to cover is the whole reason for this event, because this is all about St. Patrick's Day, right? So we have a breakfast buffet in the morning. We have midget wrestling happening shortly after the breakfast buffet starts, about midway through, really. And then after that, later on in the night, we end up having Wrigley Field do its own little night party, essentially, to celebrate St. Patrick's Day, with their own little DJ and everything. But we're not going to cover that. We're just going to cover what St. Patrick's Day actually means, or what the reason is for this whole giant event that most of the population in the U.S. seems to take part in to one degree or another. Now, St. Patrick's Day is about May 17th every single year, just because the fact that we're trying to celebrate the death of St. Patrick. Imagine that, right? This dude died way back in 461 AD, so details on his life and on his name and history are kind of shady. We're not entirely sure about all the details there. But we do know that the first time that America celebrated this event was in 1737 in Boston, Massachusetts. Ever since then, we have tried to celebrate this event on a more regular scale, so to speak. So once we celebrated it once, it was like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. We have a bunch of Irish people that are Christian. They're celebrating this event. And then all of a sudden it becomes this very Irish celebration kind of event, to where Irish just feel like they are obligated to celebrate St. Patrick's Day every single day that it is celebrated, which is March 17th. Now, the cool thing is, or the not so cool thing, I should say, is that March 17th falls on a Thursday this year. I just so happen to be teaching on Tuesday and Thursdays this year, so it doesn't work out so well for me or for my students, because my students have to worry about going to my class here in a few hours on Thursday, versus being just focused on trying to celebrate and drink and party on St. Patrick's Day, which is what most people do in most parts of the world that actually celebrate it. So I definitely feel for my students. I do. It's just we have priorities, unfortunately. And because we have priorities, I have to sit there and give a lecture for 2 hours. Then we have to do a lab for an hour or two. And so we are kind of left in this situation where, from 6 to 10 p.m., we are unfortunately unable to do anything better during that time. As such, you know what? It's not my fault. I'm sorry. It's just the nature of the holiday. I wish I could do nothing on St. Paddy's Day. I wish I could just sit around and drink and party all day, because I myself am about 38% British and Irish, as determined by 23andMe, a DNA testing service. It's actually fairly cheap. They just up their prices because they're actually able to give you some information on what things you are predisposed towards, just genetically speaking. So 23andMe is actually really nice. Being priced at about $200, that's pretty nice for being a DNA typing service, for being a service where they can take your swab of DNA from the inside of your mouth, from your saliva basically, and your cheek cells, and being able to derive whatever ancestries you have, as well as whatever particular predispositions you have towards certain diseases or ailments or whatever. They're getting very, very good about that as far as at 23andMe. As such, that means that when it comes to people like me, I can literally report to you that most of my chromosomes have British or Irish descent. Now, the reason why we kind of lump British and Irish is because of the fact that at one point in the past, Britain and Ireland were actually connected by a land bridge. Since they are connected, at that time of human settlement in that area, it's kind of blurred the lines between British and Irish. Now, I know that my great-grandmother, I know that she was 100% from Ireland. Does that mean that she was also some percentage English from Great Britain? I don't know. But you know what? I have a total of 38% British and Irish descent in my DNA, meaning that that is actually the majority of my DNA as far as my descent is concerned. As far as my ancestry is concerned, most of it is British and Irish. So of anybody who's around, I actually have a pretty good reason, so to speak, to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. Just because I myself am predominantly Irish or British. Now, my other parts of DNA are composed of German, which is typical of West Europeans. And it just kind of falls in percentage from there. But the point is that, you know what? I'm okay with that. I'm okay with people celebrating St. Patrick's Day even if they aren't Irish. Even if they don't have any Irish ancestry to them. Or if they're, for some reason, we kind of correlate these things to wearing green. Because green isn't the color of most plants. But we also tend to correlate St. Patrick's Day with whether or not you're wearing green. And well, if you're wearing green or not, I don't care. It's great for you to celebrate this event. It's great for you to take part in this celebration of trying to have fun for once, as opposed to work. Whether you have to go to class 6 to 10 p.m. on that day or not, I would like you to enjoy it. I would like you to have fun on that day, whether you're going to my class or not. And it's one of those opportunities that we can take as Americans to try and go out and get a good deal on alcohol or food or whatever, and then come back and get back to the duties that we need to tend to, whether it be our classes or whether it be children or whatever. So it's definitely really nice as far as that's concerned, the impact that St. Patrick's Day has on not only our economy but also the workforce. Because it's very, very nice to see people be able to take a break for once and imbibe a little as far as some of the green beer, as far as take advantage of some of the deals that are available, whether it be free food, a free breakfast buffet, so to speak, or whatever. Free entertainment, whether it be midget jello wrestling, and we're just trying to encourage that. And that's excellent, because really, honestly, from this whole thing, there's really no point at which somebody suffers without benefiting somebody else. Because that's what today is all about. Today is all about having fun. Today is all about getting out there and enjoying yourself and the world around you. Now, going back to kind of the main topic, St. Patrick himself was born in Britain, so it's difficult for people when they start saying that, hey, St. Patrick's Day is all about Irish, because, well, the guy responsible for it, St. Patrick himself, actually wasn't born in Ireland. He was born in Britain. Now, at age 16, he was taken to Ireland by raiders from Ireland that were interested in recruiting slaves to shepherd their flocks. So St. Patrick himself, he kind of shepherded some flocks for some time, and during this time he was able to get some sort of, I want to say relationship or communion with God during that time. Because your time as a shepherd, you're just out there with the flock. For the most part, the flock isn't really doing anything, whether it be sheep or goats or whatever. They're pretty much just sitting out there eating grass or just lazing in the sun. It's really not much to go off of, right? Now, when we come to the point that some sort of action happens, then yeah, okay. Then, whether a wolf comes in to try to feed upon something, or something in your flock, or whether a hunter that is not respecting your property as far as your sheep or your goats, then you would have a problem. But honestly, for the most part, you really don't have a whole lot of duties as a shepherd. You're just supposed to watch the flock and make sure they don't die, essentially. Uh, as such, we have a lot of time left to either thought or contemplation. And this guy in particular, St. Patrick, he was able to start kind of drawing up his own idea of God and start trying to commune with God in some way. Whether that be through just passively mentioning him while he's sitting there watching over the herd or whatever. And so eventually, a few years later, since he got kidnapped when he was age 16, 6 years later, around age 22, he was able to actually get away from these Irish slavers, basically. Once he was able to get away, he kind of stowed away on a ship and was able to make it back to the English mainland. Okay. At that point, he basically decided to become a priest. He's like, hey, I've communed with God a lot. He seems to understand me. And so, you know what? I'm going to become a priest. And that's fine. So he spends the next 20 years or so trying to become a priest and do the best that he can as far as being a priest and living up to what it expects. Now, during that time, he ends up having this dream. And in this dream, he's basically standing on the shore of Britain, of Great Britain, facing Ireland, and hearing voices call out to him from the island of Ireland. And these voices say, "We beg you, holy youth, that you shall come and shall walk again amongst us." So, in this dream, he's basically seeing people on Ireland call out to him and call him back. Even though that was his place of enslavement. Even though that was a place where he wasted 6 years of his life being a shepherd. He's seeing that island call back to him. And so, you know what? He ends up going. After many years being a priest and training to become a priest, he goes back to Ireland. And he, funny enough, kind of uses some of the own botany and knowledge of the island itself against the Irish to try to convert them to Christianity. One of those things is the clover. Okay, he picks up a shamrock or three-leafed clover and goes, "Hey, you know what this is? This is the Holy Trinity right here." So we have 3 different leaves. One is the Holy Spirit, one is God, and one is Jesus. Okay, you have the Holy Trinity right there. And he uses that. He uses that particular plant, so to speak, against the Irish in order to try to convert them. He's like, hey, this particular plant, more often than not, is in 3 leaves. It's in what we call a clover. In each of these leaves, we can consider one part of the Holy Trinity. So clearly you were meant to come to this religion because this religion has as many parts as the predominant plant on your island. And so he uses that against the Irish people. He's like, hey, here's a plant. You see it every day. You know exactly what I'm talking about. There are 3 different parts to it. And those different parts represent the exact different parts of my religion. So you should come to my religion. Because your pagan religion that involves a different god of the sun, a different god of the moon, a different god of the water, a different god of the land, different god for wind. All these different gods, we can just kind of sum together. We can just kind of bring together into this trifecta that we call the Holy Trinity, which is represented by the shamrock or the clover, so to speak. And you know what? That guy was genius. Absolutely genius. He did a great job trying to summarize all those things and try to convert every person on that island of Ireland. And that's how he attained his sainthood, essentially, because he was the most successful at converting people on that island to Christianity, which was the dominant religion of that area of that time. Now, at some point, we start to wonder whether what St. Patrick did was necessarily the right thing. And you start hearing these tales about, oh, well, St. Patrick was able to go in, he was able to convert a lot of the population from its pagan beliefs to its Christian beliefs. Was that the right thing? And if you look 700 years in the future, you start thinking, well, that would be a great thing just because of the Crusades that proceeded from that point. Right? So we needed as many people as possible to participate in these Crusades, which were essentially cleansing operations done by the Catholic Church. And these were essentially operations where we went through the entirety of the world, mostly Europe, of course, but also down into the Middle East, where we went through the world and tried to cleanse each of these areas that had other religions that were not Christian and convert them to Christianity. As such, that basically means that, hey, every single operation that we're doing right now in, the 500s of AD, we're basically trying to get at the point where we have a strong enough force to where we can take on the rest of the world that's not like us and conquer them and kill them and basically conquer the entire world through religion. And that starts getting at the point that, well, maybe that's not necessarily the best way to go. And so it starts asking me at some point, where do you say, hey, that's enough? Or, hey, you know what? You can believe what you want to believe. I'll believe what I want to believe. It starts asking that question because the Crusades were all about, hey, you need to know that the trifecta, the clover leaf, represents a holy trinity of God and Jesus and the Holy Spirit. If you don't understand that, you will die. Not our problem. That's our instructions. So, if you don't understand that, we're going to have to kill you. Sorry. It's just the will of our Pope. And that is a time period where everything was run by a religion. Which is, funny enough, why when America is founded, we end up having this constitution that is trying to separate itself from a religion as much as possible. Because the Americans somehow realize that, hey, religion is not necessarily the way to go. The way to go is reason. The way to go is science. The way to go is logic. And so we're going to take all those lessons that we learned from Britain, from Great Britain overseas, and we're going to apply those here in America. So it's great to see that. It really is. Excellent to see Americans trying to separate themselves from their religious upbringings that basically produced all the problems in the first place. So, when we start looking at these things, we start hearing some myths or tales about St. Patrick on the original island of Ireland. And we hear that, oh, well, he actually went to the island originally to drive out these snakes. You're like, what? What are you talking about? Drive out snakes? He just went to the island to convert everyone from pagan religion to Christian religion. That's all he did. But there are these myths and these tales about him driving the snakes from Ireland. Well, funny enough, in Christian religion, snakes are kind of a symbol of evil. So, when we talk about driving the snakes from Ireland, we're kind of talking about driving negative or destructive beliefs, such as paganism, from the island in favor of Christianity on the island, in unity, essentially. Now, what's cool is that when we start thinking about Ireland itself, it actually doesn't have snakes on it, which is where this myth originally came from anyway, because Ireland doesn't have snakes because of the fact that snakes tend to have limited mobility when going from a body of land to a body of land. And the greater the distances, the more those snakes are inhibited from going to one body of land in the middle of the water from another land that is what we would consider the mainland. And so we see this situation where snakes are not often found on islands because they can't move themselves a whole lot. They might be able to swim maybe tens of miles, but really that's about it. If we get out to the hundreds of miles range or the hundreds of kilometers range, we start seeing a point where, oh, snakes are never going to be present on this island. Okay, because this island came to be by some sort of action of tectonic plates coming together and forming the island, or the island came together by the fact that we had two tectonic plates coming together and interacting in such a way that it would release lava to the surface and create an island that way. We really don't see that when it comes to islands very often, as far as having snakes on the island. Just because snakes are good-sized creatures and they would require a lot of distance to exceed their reasonable mobile distance on water. Most snakes are not designed for traveling long distances on water. No matter what anybody thinks, you see a picture of an anaconda, well, obviously that's a different case. But anacondas were made for the water. Most snakes are not. So when we think about my snakes, my pet snakes here, that are ball pythons, those guys cannot travel significant distances over water. So we actually see this situation where snakes can't travel out to the islands just by pure coincidence. Because really the snakes would have to pick up a scent that actually matters to them. They're like, hey, there's some sort of scent in this direction, I'm going to explore it. And they would have to then travel out that distance just to get to that scent and get to that prey or whatever, and then establish a population on that island. More often than not, we don't see that happening. And that's simply because of the fact that snakes really don't like swimming for the most part in the ocean. Now, of course, there are exceptions. We have observed eastern diamondback rattlesnakes to swim some degree out to an island, off the coast of Florida or whatever. We have observed that before, but it's not very often that we observe that, and that's really only out to the distance of tens of miles. There's not much beyond that. So when we see these islands that are several hundred, if not several thousand miles off the shore, for instance, Hawaii doesn't contain snakes, period. That island being out in the middle of the ocean, we have some birds because birds travel long distances, but we really don't have a whole lot of large wildlife because of the fact that you have to somehow transport from the mainland to that island down the middle of the Pacific. As such, we really don't see that happening. And so if we have some sort of non-native species being introduced artificially or accidentally onto the island, let's say some snakes just so happen to carry aboard a transport carrier to Hawaii, then we would see the situation where, oh my goodness, we have snakes all of a sudden on this island that has never had snakes before. And so what we see is this interesting scenario play out where all of these organisms, whether they be lizards or frogs or birds or whatever, all these organisms that were used to surviving on their own, all these smaller organisms that had dispersed to the island, all these smaller organisms that didn't have to deal with snakes at any point in their evolution, and all of a sudden humans just so happen to bring these snake-like creatures along. That's when you run into problems. Okay, when we start having brown tree snakes introduced to Hawaii, okay, which we're trying to fight and prevent as much as humanly possible. But unfortunately, humans were exceptionally good at bringing those snakes, the brown tree snakes, to Guam. Guam was also an island that was several hundred miles from the coast. But you know what? It was a great intermediate point for dropping off and picking up supplies for transport ships. As such, all it took was one pregnant female snake being brought from Indonesia or Australia to the mainland of Guam in order to establish a population of snakes on Guam. Ever since that point, basically ever since the 1950s, we have seen a dramatic increase in most populations of living things on Guam, whether it be lizards or birds or mammals or whatever. Whatever was native to that island has essentially been eaten by the brown tree snake. And what we now have on the island is a population of brown tree snakes, which is great. I love snakes, whatever. But we also have a population of Norway rats, which always accompany human colonies no matter where they go. So not only did the snakes come to the island and annihilate every living thing on the island, but they were also able to create openings, per se, for the Norway rats to come in and establish themselves, and then take hold in a manner that kind of sustains not only the Norway rat population, which wasn't originally there, but the brown tree snake population, which wasn't supposed to be there either. And so we've basically annihilated most of the native wildlife on that island in favor of these artificial organisms that shouldn't be there, such as the brown tree snakes, such as the Norway rats. That's a problem. Humans going around and shifting the ecosystems and priorities in different ecosystems of the planet, that's a problem. And that's where we run into issues with humans as far as being like, hey, we have so many snakes on this island, we basically have like 50 snakes per acre. What are you going to do? It's difficult to catch them all. Brown tree snakes in particular are especially interesting. I've worked with those during my master's degree. Brown tree snakes are interesting because they have great eyesight. All right. So great eyesight. They have an incredible amount of flexibility to where you could basically have a 3-foot organism, a 3-foot long snake hiding in this particular book. Okay. A 3-foot snake can hide in this book. No problem, actually. They have such incredible flexibility. We also have an issue where we have snakes being brought into an area where snakes aren't normally found. So all the organisms, whether it be lizards or birds or whatever, all these organisms are used to not having snakes around. So they don't care about where they lay their eggs or where they have their nests or whatever. And that's a problem because a brown tree snake can literally get to every square inch of the island, whether it be up in the trees or whether it be down on the ground. The brown tree snake can reach there, and it will reach there. Now, brown tree snakes are actually my favorite species of snake, funny enough, and one of the reasons is because they actually have an incredible venom that works very, very well against birds or lizards. So if you're a bird or a lizard and you get bitten by a brown tree snake, you're in trouble. If you're a mammal, on the other hand, you're not in nearly as much trouble from the bite because the toxin in their venom, the primary toxin in their venom, is very, very taxon specific. That is to say that it's very, very specific towards working on birds and lizards, but not so specific towards working on or against mammals. The issue is that in brown tree snakes, if they come across a mammal, they somehow know that their venom doesn't work very well against mammals, whether it be a mouse or whatever. And so when it comes to mammals, brown tree snakes actually opt for their secondary offense. Instead of using venom, they actually use constriction. So they will bite and hold, just like a python would, just like a boa constrictor would. They would bite and hold and then wrap their body coils around that organism to strangle it to death, to cause its heart to stop. So you almost have this situation where one of the most unique, one of the most powerful organisms on our planet is introduced to an island ecosystem where it can basically have a free-for-all buffet. Whether it be a bird, a lizard, or a mammal, this brown tree snake can eat it. Doesn't matter. It will eat anything and everything in its path. And because it has such incredible flexibility, because it has such great eyesight, because it has such an incredible ability to eat anything, it's very, very difficult for us to control its populations. And such is the case with a number of invasive organisms that get onto islands that shouldn't be there. So that's why we're trying to safeguard Hawaii as much as possible. Anytime that there is a report of a snake on Hawaii, there's immediately a response team that's sent out to try to find that snake and try to eliminate it. Try to prevent snakes from taking place or getting a hold on the ecological system of Hawaii. Because if that would be the case, it would literally eliminate most frog species, most bird species, most mammal species that are native to Hawaii. Just because of how incredibly novel that snake is to the ecological system there on Hawaii. And so that's why we have those systems in place to try to limit that kind of effect. Now, when relating this all back to St. Patrick's Day, we can also kind of talk about how the snake is generally used as a symbol for evil in Christianity, right? So we're thinking about times where, Eve was tempted by the snake to take a bite of the apple, right? It was all because of that snake, that one instance of weakness, so to speak, that the bad reputation of snakes was set in stone. because Christianity is the dominant population or religion of the populations of this planet at this time. And so a lot of people end up believing that, hey, snakes are evil, because clearly it was evil in Genesis of the Bible. Well, that's unfortunate. It's very, very unfortunate. And so we're trying to reach a point where a lot of these types of misperceptions as a result of religion are trying to be moderated, or at least worked out of the common vernacular. Okay, whether it be people being called snakes for being backstabbing, for being lying, for being whatever, conniving. We're trying to get away from that stage, just because we're trying to show snakes as actually a positive, especially when you think about how many drugs are currently being used in the United States and saving people's lives. We think about at least a dozen different drugs. That's not snakes trying to kill us. That's just learning from the snakes and their innate mechanisms to kill their prey, to defend themselves. We're taking those mechanisms into account when trying to develop drugs to further human lifespan, to try to promote the human condition. So the more that we can learn from snakes, the better, actually, because we have that knowledge base already of just a dozen different snakes in dozen different compounds that are currently being utilized as drugs to help us live longer and live healthier lives. So it'd be nice to continue that trend, definitely. But just kind of relating this all back to St. Paddy's Day, we're seeing kind of this whole use of snake. St. Patrick driving all the snakes out of Ireland. We're kind of seeing this as being a euphemism for driving the evil pagan beliefs out of the island in favor of the Christian beliefs that are then coming into the belief system of the island peoples. And so when we hear about St. Patrick driving the snakes from the island, we're basically just hearing nothing but an analogy towards, hey, you're just driving all the pagan beliefs out of all the native peoples. So you're killing a culture in order to replace the culture with whatever you want. I'm sorry, that sounds a lot like going in and raping and pillaging a culture for the fact of trying to spread your own beliefs, of trying to go in and convert the entirety of the population to the way that you think is best. I have a problem with that. It's confounding to me as to why other people don't have problems with this. Why other people are perfectly okay with this. Be like, hey, you know what? Crusades were a side effect of trying to unify everybody in the religion that is Christianity. And that's just one of those roadblocks we have to cross. Well, that's kind of an issue because right now we're in this impasse between us and Islam, between predominantly Christian-believing Western nations, such as America, and predominantly Muslim populations in the Middle East. And we see this impasse generated by the Muslim need for, need, I say in quotes, Muslim need for a jihad. And we're sitting there like, oh my gosh, jihad is so terrible, it's so awful, and on and so forth. But it's like, well, do you realize that Christianity did the exact same thing? We just didn't call it a jihad, we called it a crusade. To where we basically went across the rest of Europe, the rest of the Middle East, And we essentially tried to dominate and conquer everything, so all nations were under the same religion or under the same belief system, such that we could unify the clans, so to speak, such that we could eliminate all opposition to our belief systems. Well, that's a problem. That really is a problem. Because despite the fact we may be doing things under the guise of doing what's best for us and for our children and for the people around us, it's still, I'm sorry, it's still kind of a horrible thing to go around and just say, hey, I'm going to conquer you because you don't believe what I believe. So you better prepare your defenses, and I'm coming in tomorrow. Sorry. Unless you want to completely bow to my way of thinking, to my particular belief system, to my particular view of the world and set of beliefs. If you don't bow to that, you die. And it's incredibly crude. Incredibly crude. I just find myself being astounded that so many people around the world ascribe to this particular mindset, to be like, hey, you know what, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with just going around on missionary missions to Africa and to Mexico and whatever, and being able to try and convert as many of those people as possible. And it's like, what happens to the native culture? It gets destroyed. That's what happens. So if you can think that you're okay by doing that, well, that's fine. It's just when you think that that is for the greater good, that's where we start running into this gray area, so to speak, where you're like, well, would they have been better off by themselves, just being left alone, or should we literally convert everyone to the same belief system all around the world and use force whenever necessary? You know, if I come into their village and they say, no, we don't have any interest in Christian beliefs, when is it okay to start just going into that village and start killing everyone in the pursuit of your own beliefs? Especially, for some reason we have this bias in belief systems that the Christian way is the way to less bloodshed, is the way to prevent bloodshed later on down the line. When really, Christianity was christened in a series of bloodshed events. Whether it be the Crusades, or whether it be the strict crucifixion of Christ, it's definitely a very, very, very violent religion. And so when people start reading from the Quran, or reading from the Bible, whether it be Old or New Testament, you will find a number of instances where it is extremely violent, and it kind of counters the normal way of thinking that we would say in today's vernacular, just because it seems to be counterintuitive towards life and prosperity. Because according to the old way, you just need to kill anybody who doesn't agree with you. That's what it states in the Bible. Anybody that is not your friend is your enemy. It states that in the Bible, in the Christian Bible. And many other religions adopt the same context, because that was how they could gather as many followers as possible under one umbrella, under one religion, and most effectively control the most people is through religion. And not to sound like a freaky conspiracy theorist here, but control definitely plays a lot into this whole scenario of religions. Whether it be an Islamic religion, or a Christian religion, or a pagan religion, whatever. All these different religions play into the fact that, hey, I'm thinking one way, you should be thinking the same way I am. So since you're not willing to do that of your own accord, I'm going to go in and kill you. That seems to be a problem for me. I don't know why so many other people accept it. And Christian people are often in denial of this whole phenomenon because they go in and say, oh, well, Christianity is entirely a religion of peace. Well, really? You want to claim it's a religion of peace when we have several hundred years worth of crusades that prove otherwise? I don't think there is much peace involved in receiving Christianity at the point of a sword tip. Okay, I don't think there is much opportunity for certain primitive European or Middle Eastern nations to sit there and say, hey, we're not terribly interested in your religion, and so we're just going to pass for now. That's not going to fly. There's just no way that will possibly work in today's society. So it's a very interesting interplay between religion and belief. As far as exerting your force on other people, I definitely encourage, as far as my personal beliefs, I encourage lack of religion or belief systems just in favor of logic and scientific reason. That's what I really prefer personally. And that's typically what I encourage in everyone else. So I would just like to thank you for tuning in to Based on Facts. You can find every one of our radio episodes on Facebook and on YouTube simply by entering Based on Facts onto the search bar. This is Chris Rex. Thank you for listening and have a good time.